Namaskara and welcome to BIC Talks, a podcast by Bangalore International Centre, bringing you conversations that move, inform, and encourage discourse.
It is about the time when on one side the Manusmriti is getting written, the Dharma Shastras are being compiled, the Shastras excluding the society, including only some, leaving out some. On the other side, the Mahabharata takes on that tradition of exclusion and becomes an open source book, free for all. And in order to make it free for all, via media, somebody who understands the Shastras and somebody who understands the folk, puts together the story again, emphasizing its essential ingredients, but bringing in a talent of his own. And the name of that man, as we believe, is Vyasa.
The Ramayana and the Mahabharata have exerted immense influence on the life and thought of Indians. If the Ramayana is a unitary saga, the Mahabharata is a federal epic. Its impact has remained as deep now as it was 2000 years ago. Who actually composed it? Why did the epic allow people to weave in it? Peppered with readings and music, this episode is an extract from the fourth and final talk of the masterclass series, Memory, Culture and the Being of India by Professor N Devy, which took place in early February 2022 at the Bangalore International Centre. If one were to think of it just as a story, bringing together myth, legend, history, and pure imagination, the narrative is simple. A devastating war fought between cousins, with almost all the regional contemporary rulers of the time aligned on one or the other side. The story, read at this level, is spread over 5 generations. While the war itself is fought over 18 days, each day bringing in new twists and turns into the narrative.
The major characters are Shantanu, Ganga, Satyavati of the first generation, Bhishma, Vyasa, Vichitravirya, Chitravirya, Chitrangada, Amba, Ambalika of the second generation, Pandu, Kunti, Madari, Dhritarashtra, Gandhari, Vidura, Krishna's father Vasudeva, and some acharyas, mainly of the third generation. Karna, the 3 sons of Kunti, Yudhishthira, Arjuna, and Bhima, 2 sons of Madri, Nakula and Sahadeva, Duryodhana, Dushasana, and their 98 brothers. Krishna, Balarama, Shakuni, and an array of other kings and princes who joined the action in the 4th generation. Abhimanyu, Uttara, Gatotkacha, and many named but minor characters of the 5th generation. These are only the main characters.
There is also a much larger cast of characters in the form of servants, messengers, soothsayers, charioteers, fighters, and mythological persons, offering quite a copious representation of types: human, supernatural, and from the shadow world beyond reality. Then there are the numerous brothers of Duryodhana and Dushasana named in the poem:
Dushasa,
Dussalan,
Jalagandha,
Sama,
Saha,
Vinda,
Anuvinda,
Durdarsha,
Subahu,
Dushpradarsha,
Durmashana,
Durmukha,
Dushkarna,
Vikarna,
Sala,
Satvan,
Sulochan,
Chitra.
Kapachitra.
These are only a few of the 101 names.
The earliest known version of the epic in the oral tradition was called Bharatha or Jaya Itihas, a saga of triumph that has at its heart the great destruction which one must accept on its own terms. Tradition, however, assigns the name Vyasa to the great poet who composed the epic. A closer scrutiny tends to reveal that the historic claim to its authorship has certain peculiar difficulties. The poetic energy, intellectual range, and philosophical depth of whosoever created it are so stupendous that a comprehensive analysis of the Mahabharata becomes a challenging task.
It leaves one so spellbound that it hardly becomes possible to state with any degree of certainty what it is all about. Is it only a string of stories, an unending and breathtaking torrent of episode after absorbing episode with no purpose apart from depicting the life and times of the Kuru clan and its great war? One likes to ask, does it have a purpose in stringing the tales together? The standardized version of the epic has some 88,000 verses, distributed in 97 cantos, placed in what the Western epics call books or parvas in the Sanskrit tradition. There are in all 18 of them. In the sequence, Adi Parva, Sabha Parva, Aryana Parva, Virata Parva, Udyoga Parva, Bhishma Parva, Drona Parva, Karna Parva, Shalya Parva, Sauptika Parva, Stri Parva, Shanti Parva, Anushasana Parva, Ashwamedha Parva, Ashramavasika Parva, Mosala Parva, Mahaprasthanika Parva, and Swargarohana Parva.
Together, they cover a vast array of topics, amply justifying what Indians have believed in for centuries, that there is nothing in the cosmos that is not present in the Mahabharata. The question that comes to one's mind is, what does this vast mass of literary depiction intend to do? What indeed is its purpose? What do all these long books achieve as a single literary entity and as a single spectrum of imaginative depiction of things near and distant? In order to grasp the full significance of these questions, it is necessary to refer to the distinction introduced by the late 18th century European scholars in the context of their own epic traditions between the written epics and oral epics.
Their conceptualization of the epic genre assumed that a written epic has a unity in its structure. The ancient Greek philosopher Aristotle had argued while discussing Greek literature that tragedy has a unity of place, time, and action. He proposed that tragedy needs to be played out within a single place, single time, and single and continuous action with a defined beginning, middle, and end. Centuries later, after John Milton had produced a pair of epics, Paradise Lost and Paradise Regained, the 18th century view expected a written epic, with its authorship known to the readers to have a unity of purpose.
This view held that as against the written epic, the oral epic normally is more of a rambling string of ballad-like compositions. An oral epic has, it was argued, a hero and other heroic characters. Through the action in it may not be organized within a single space, and the time depicted in it can be broken into irregular periods, long or short. The Iliad of Homer, classified as an oral epic, brings to life a relatively short span of time at the end of the Trojan War. The Odyssey, the second epic assigned to Homer, runs over a span of 12 years. In other words, literary critics 3 centuries ago felt that it was not necessary to ask an oral epic its purpose or theme. Its primary function is to reflect the norms and features of an ancient society and to tell a grand story.
Beyond that, the oral epic has few other objectives. Of course, the assessment of epic literature in the West has undergone much change during the last 3 centuries. Particularly, ever since the study of myths started gaining interest in the fields of anthropology and psychology, oral epics have received a more hospitable response from literary critics. It needs to be remembered that every epic is peculiar in the cultural and literary functions it draws up for itself. No two epics can be equated or compared without being unfair to one or to both of them.
Krishna, do you believe in the possibility of peace?
I think what I say is possible.
A good starting point for following the plot of the Mahabharata epic is to begin with the reign of Shantanu. 2 generations after Bharata, the semi-mythical hero after whom the poem gets its title. Shantanu was married to Ganga, and after Ganga returned to her otherworldly abode, to Satyavati, Shantanu and Ganga gave birth to 8 children, 7 of whom Ganga deliberately offered to the river Ganga. Only one, the last born Devavrata, was saved by Shantanu before she made the offering. The Mahabharata is silent about Ganga after this. Shantanu married Satyavati after several years, by when Devavrata had fully grown up.
On Satyavati's father's insistence, Devavrata took an oath to remain unmarried so that Shantanu was succeeded by one of her sons. Satyavati had 2 sons, Chitravirya, also known as Chitrangada, and Vichitravirya. Bhishma kidnaps 3 princesses of the Kashi kingdom. He gets 2 of them, Ambika and Ambalika, married to Vichitravirya. They give birth to 1 son each, not born of Vichitravirya but of Vyasa. Vyasa's appearance terrifies the 2 women. During the act of copulation, one completely closes her eyes while the other goes pale with fear. Due to these circumstances of the forced continuation of the Kuru line, the son of Ambika is born blind and is named Dhritarashtra. The son of Ambalika is Pandu, who is born completely pale and is so named after the Sanskrit word for the color. The blind Dhritarashtra is married to Gandhari, who emulates her husband and blindfolds herself for the rest of her life. Gandhari is the sister of Shakuni, who later in the story plays the role of the wicked advisor to the Kaurava princes. Pandu first marries Kunti and later Madri. However, both Pandu and Madri die before the war begins.
Dhritarashtra and Gandhari have numerous children, a girl named Dushala, and 98 boys, including Duryodhana and Dushasana. Barring Karna, whom Kunti had abandoned before marriage, her 3 sons and 2 of Madri are the 5 Pandavas. All the 5 Pandava brothers take Draupadi as their shared wife on the instruction of their mother. Arjuna has another wife, the sister of Krishna, Subhadra. Arjuna and Subhadra give birth to Abhimanyu, who is later married to Uttara. Before Abhimanyu's death in the war at a tender age, Uttara conceives and later gives birth to Parikshita. Married to Madhavati, Parikshita has a son called Janamejaya. If one were to make sense of this maze of characters, each one of them more heroic than the other, and try to think of a single line of lineage leaving out the branches where the Kuru clan line comes to an end, it would read Shantanu, Vichitravirya, Pandu, Arjuna, Abhimanyu, Parikshita, and Janamejaya.
Of these 7 generations, 3 are directly involved in the war. 2 precede it, and the remaining 2 are the generations that follow the war. However, in the epic, the last 2 generations are mentioned in the very first book, the Adi Parva, creating an impression that Parikshita and Janamejaya and the snake sacrifice ritual, the Sarpa Yajna, precede the war. The arrangement is possible as the Mahabharata was composed after the war. That, however, cannot be evidence enough to confirm the historical accuracy of the poem as a history of the Great War described in the Mahabharata. It is possible in a poem, particularly in an epic, to begin the narrative not at the temporal beginning of the plot, but at the end or the middle of the story. Most Western epics are expected to begin in medias res, somewhere in the middle of the story. Thus, Janamejaya and Parikshita appearing at the beginning of the poem can be seen as a technique employed towards emphasizing the historical authenticity of what is to follow in the poem as the account of a great transition, the end of an epoch, Yuganta, and the beginning of a new one.
Of the members of the Kuru clan, the ones who participate in the war are Bhishma, the Kauravas Duryodhana, Dushasana, and their 98 brothers, the 4 children of Kunti, that is Karna, and the first 3 Pandavas, the 2 children of Madri and Abhimanyu. Of them, all but Yudhishthira, Arjuna, Bhima, Nakula, and Sahadeva are killed in the Great War. There are many other kings and princes involved as well. Their armies get entirely destroyed. There are teachers of the Kuru princes who too get killed. After the war, the elder generation, Kunti, Gandhari, Dhritarashtra, and Vidura, move to dwell in a forest. All of them die in a forest fire. Krishna, who joins the war as Arjuna's charioteer, dies in his own country some 68 years later in a state of anarchy that his Yadava clan has created in the kingdom. After Krishna's death, the 5 Pandavas and their wife, together with a dog, start walking north towards the mountains, and they drop dead one by one on the way, except Yudhishthira or Dharmaraja. Of course, they are united in the other world. There, the story of war and the ascension to Swarga comes to an end.
बोलिए वृंदावन बिहारी लाल की जय, गुरुदेव भगवान की जय। चल दे भाई।
Ever since Vyasa's Mahabharata came into circulation, generations of Indians have felt compelled to relate to it, to revive it, and to make it their own through different mediums. In a way, it became the non-Brahmins' book of religion, their Dharma Grantha, not because it made any claim to being a Dharma Sutra, but because it carefully avoided making that claim. The canonical Dharma Sutras, such as the Manusmriti, became the fountainhead of scorn, hatred, and social exclusion. The naked advocacy of Varna and caste distinction, justified in pseudo-theological and legislative styles, their entirely non-forgiving attitude to labor, and the classes engaged in labor, their canonization of scorn and inequality, were sure to alienate the non-Brahmanical classes. The Mahabharata, on the other hand, remained a much-loved text. Its audiences were prepared to overlook the fact that it too spoke of the Kshatriya and the Brahmins according to the norms of social orthodoxy. But the characters it depicted in hues of myth, grandeur, and heroism provided all classes of the population a space for imagining a society which had women like Kunti and Draupadi, rulers like Bhishma and Yudhishthira, and heroes like Karna and Abhimanyu.
The Mahabharata became for Indians during the last 2000 years a veritable mine of ideals of courage, moral truth, and liberation. The Bhagavad Gita, which draws heavily upon the Upanishads, too received this kind of response. Generations of Indians read and recited it as a work that teaches the virtues of action, detachment, and devotion, not so much as a work that advocates violence. Living in a society that was marked by severe exclusion based on caste and gender, repressive pollution norms, and taboos instilled by superstition and fear of divine retribution, people deprived of recognition as humans continued to develop a unique affinity towards the heroes and deities valorized in the Mahabharata. Sects and cults dedicated to Vishnu, Krishna, Ganesha grew in significance throughout the first millennium. The influence of the Mahabharata has been so pervasive during the last 2 millennia that presenting merely an outline of it should easily take several volumes.
Among the modern Indian languages, Tamil has been in use since the time Vyasa wrote his Mahabharata. Most other Indian languages started emerging as the chosen medium of people's expression around the beginning of the second millennium. Among them, several have rendered the Bhagavad Gita or parts of the Mahabharata. Scholars of Sanskrit produced written copies of the epic, which people, even in villages, were keen to acquire if they had enough wealth for doing so. When the Bhandarkar Institute was collecting the Mahabharata Manuscripts, many were found in places which had not been known places of learning. For instance, a handwritten manuscript dating back to 1512 CE was sourced from a small village called Sankheda in Gujarat's tribal belt. It is included in the critical edition as the Sankheda Kapuri version. One has visited Sankheda numerous times for one's work related to the Adivasis and has not observed any traces of Brahminical or Vedic education.
The most widely known epic imagination of India to be found among ancient texts is embedded in the Mahabharata. One is not pointing to its structure as an epic, but rather to its epical presentation of the human condition. The narrative imagination is to be found in the edicts of Ashoka, and the lyrical imagination of India can be located in Kalidasa's play Abhignana Shakuntala. The Mahabharata depicts several generations and an epoch-making conflict, a breathtaking range of characters, and an amazing wealth of wisdom and information on life as it used to be. Western epics follow an unwritten rule in their composition. They begin the action in the medias res. The Mahabharata refuses to identify any single act or event as the beginning of its narrative.
The Adi Parva takes us to many different beginnings, from Shantanu's wanderings to Bhishma's accursed celibacy to the stories in the lives of mountains, rivers, ghosts, and animals, that it is virtually impossible to say where the story begins. Similarly, several Parvas, after the conclusion of the war and even beyond the mythical Svargarohana, ascension to heaven, indicate that the ever-moving wheel of life knows no ending. In fact, the Mahabharata makes the wheel in perpetual motion its central metaphor. For the Mahabharata, that movement is the essence of dharma.
The edicts of Ashoka could have been presented him like an Alexander, an all-powerful, all-giving sovereign. But they refrain from doing so. He is instead depicted as a Devanapriya, a human dear to gods, because he is humble and ready to serve all. That he chose to make the wheel his primary emblem indicates his understanding of the idea of India. The Shakuntala story is a lyrical statement of the same imagination of India. The story begins at once in Indraloka, where Dushyanta is fighting the menace of the Rakshasas in Kanva's ashram, where a young Shakuntala is growing up. It does not end, as would a romance play in any Western tradition, with the reunion of Dushyanta and Shakuntala after the tragic separation caused by a temporary lapse of memory. It continues well past that point and presents to us their young son, Bharata, whose name is accepted as one of the two names of our country by the Constitution.
The Mahabharata created a unique method of remembering the past. India has internalized that method as the way of preserving its national memory. The Mahabharata, in that sense, is our national epic. It is an epic not about the nation, but about our manner of remembering the past. It unites us as a nation through a similarly perceived past, not through a similarly perceived collective self. In that method, there is a great sense of ease with the past because it admits to having many beginnings. The Mahabharata spirit is bound to agitate against any jingoistic and unitary sense of the subcontinent as a nation, for it is marked by an immense diversity of every kind. The Mahabharata unites us not in any imagined territorial national space, it brings us together in time, symbolized by the never-stopping Kala Chakra, the epic's iconic symbol, which teaches us a great spirit of acceptance of all that is in complete humility.
अष्टादश सहस्राणि अष्टादश शतानि च आम वेत्ति शुको वेत्ति संजया वेत्ति वनवा. This is the self confession of the first narrator of the Mahabharata. This first narration, as the Adi Parva reports, took place in an ashram. And in that ashram, a fellow came in wandering, a wandering bard. He was terrible to look at. And the inmates, the students, should have actually felt scared of him. But then he brought in stories. So the children went to him and said, "Please tell us more. Do not stop here." He said, "Look, I know only about 8,000 or so lines of this story. But there's another man, Shuka, who knows probably an equal number of lines of this long bardic song. And there is Sanjay, who may be knowing about the same number of lines. The lines that Shuka knew, Sanjay did not know. Nor did this Lomaharshana, Ugrashravas, terrible-looking man in a university. The three belong to different communities. As you know, Sanjay was very well-known character in the Mahabharata. He is the one who eventually gives Durdarshana to a blind king. Shuka, on the other hand, belongs to a mixed class. And the wandering singer definitely is from the forest. The Mahabharata brings from the moment of his first narration a mix of society. That is its signature on page 1. The Mahabharata, unlike a story, does not begin with the beginning or somewhere in the middle and moving to the end, but it tries to look from the present to the past. Janmejaya, who the Pandavani woman was celebrating, as you heard, is the very last one. It is from the Janmejaya's perspective that the Mahabharata narrates the Bhishma and Ganga and the birth of the Pandavas and Shantanu and all that, looking from the present to the past. And in that sense, the composer of the Mahabharata does the second signature, that it is something about history. It is not just a story of like Shakuntala and Dushyanta, or Ruru and Priyamvada, or Satyavan and Savitri. Those stories are embedded in this epic. But certainly, there is a very clear statement that it is a story about the past from the perspective of now and here and now. What is this history of? Which historical period does it cover? There is a third signature in the Mahabharata. We do not have to build any conjectures. It is very much there in the Mahabharata. It is a poem collected from many local languages, but nonetheless composed in the Sanskrit language using the Anushtup meter. The Anushtup is a post-Vedic meter. You cannot imagine a light machine gun in the hands of the soldiers of Rana Pratap, because light machine gun follows a simple rifle, which follows a sword. So Anushtup is the metrical form of the Mahabharata, places it in a post-Vedic era. The language which it uses to assimilate the stories places it in an age which is past the age of the Rigveda. The Rigveda, dated at 1400 before Christ, tells us that the first composition of the Mahabharata is sometime after 1400 before Christ. I am saying sometime after. So how much time after the Rigveda? That's a big question. And there, the Mahabharata gives yet another signal in the genealogies that it constructs. If I had time enough, and you had time enough, we could have sat with taking the genealogy. I given it at the end of this book, which is a fictitious genealogy, not historic genealogy, but genealogy as it was understood by people in Pradyota dynasty, roughly the 8th century before Christ, about 200 or 300 years before Buddha. It is the story of the past looked at from an 8th century before Christ man's or woman's perspective. Story covering the time from after the decline of the Harappan civilization till its times, which is, in other words, the Harappan civilization comes to an abrupt end around the 1900 before Christ, 2000 years before Christ. So this is a story of roughly 600, 500 years, somewhat clearly and vaguely about 1,000 years. Now this clarity and vagueness have to be clubbed together in such a way that what is told cannot be seen only as myth, but at the same time cannot be seen only as factual history. And that is where the maker of the Mahabharata excels, by making myth look like history, history look like myth, which is neither myth entirely nor history entirely. And so the maker of this poem invents a method of using many beginnings to begin the story. Who composed this story? None did it. There are many sources, many wandering people singing stories about what they had heard or experienced or had inherited from their ancestors. They were wandering about. It was a culture of wandering singers. It was a culture of nomadic people. It was a culture which had received a severe civilizational shock of destruction of the Harappan, the Indus civilization, and people were wandering, singing. Many such come together. In this book, I have given one example of a story dating back to the original Mahabharata, a component of that story, which is inherited by the Garasia Bhils of Rajasthan, which is also about Ganga, Bhishma, Arjuna, but with completely different take on that entire story. Around the 8th century before Christ, somebody brings these different components together, reporting that in an ashram, 2 or 3 different story singers assemble, and then a first comprehensive recital of the original Mahabharata takes place. That text, generally known today as Jaya or Itihasa or Bharat, continued its journey in the oral form till about the 2nd century before Christ, probably. It is about the time when on one side the Manusmriti is getting written, the Dharma Shastras are being compiled, the Shastras excluding the society, including only some, leaving out some. On the other side, the Mahabharata, takes on that tradition of exclusion and becomes an open source book, free for all. And in order to make it free for all, a via media, somebody who understands the Shastras and somebody who understands the folk, puts together the story again, emphasizing its essential ingredients, but bringing in a talent of his own. And the name of that man, as we believe, is Vyasa. The original Bharat and the Mahabharata are two texts. The earlier is smaller, 24,000 verses. The other one, the later, composed about 6 centuries, 7 centuries later, has close to 100,000 verses, going by the Bhandarkar Institute's decades-long research on hundreds of versions of the Mahabharata that were wandering all over the country, collected, scrutinized through decades of hard research work, 100,000 verses. Obviously, if it's 24,000 as against 100,000, 75,000 verses, more than 75,000, are an addition. Who added those verses? The people did. Not all of those 75,000 were added by a man called Vyasa. People made Mahabharata a house available, cultural location available for everybody, and everybody added to it. You saw that the French were producing a play here, an Englishman was producing a movie, the Pandwani, the Chhattisgarh artist, was producing theatre, a singer in North India was producing a song, a singer in South India was producing, all of them made the Mahabharata their house, a dwelling place. Because it accommodated all. Because it refused to stick to a single beginning. And by that method, the Mahabharata defined the universe of imagination that India is. Mahabharata has one more great thing to its credit. If written in the times when Manusmriti was written, Mahabharata had the guts to show women like Ganga, women like Kunti, women like Draupadi. The Manusmriti would have dreaded at the idea of women with such great sense of selfhood and freedom. The Mahabharata also takes on the Shastra tradition on another front. And let me describe what that was. In the folk traditions in India, there is a deity called Satavai. A Satavai is both almost like a totem, a goddess, but who can be destructive. There is another called Mariai. And I used to think that Mariai is drawn after Mother Mary or something like that. But actually, in the Greek myths, there is a similar deity with Mariom, some such name. She is one of the 3 fates described in the Greek mythology. The 3 fates in the Greek mythology are given the task of making cloth, refining it, and unweaving or destroying it. The first of the fates in the Greek mythology is called Klotho. Weaving and unweaving the textile of your destiny. In Homer's epic, the second epic, the Ulysses or Odysseus, his wife Penelope, waiting for him for years, every day weaves some cloth, and at night she unweaves it so that the cloth is never complete. Weaving the cloth with 3 fates coming together has on our side the weaving of the cosmos, Brahma, Vishnu, Mahesh. They too make this cloth called life for us. The Mahabharata talks about this in a very strange symbolic way. After all, what is the war all about? Is it about Indraprastha or Hastinapur? Land there was in plenty. Is it about the cows captured from the enemy? Cows there were plenty. Is it about wealth that they want? They're capable of staying without wealth. The war decisively emerges because of the disrobing of a woman. The cloth is disturbed. Draupadi Vastraharan is the decisive turning point. I mean, they were all gambling, they're drinking, they're fighting. They're fighting from the times they were children in school, in their gymnasium. I mean, their school was like the Greek school, gymnasium, fighting. Draupadi Vastraharan is the decisive point, turning point, leading all sides to the most destructive war. Why do I refer to the Greek myth of making cloth and unmaking it? Draupadi Vastraharan? Because Bharat, which is becoming unlike the Mahabharata, is now thinking of hijab or no hijab. Mahabharata has given us a sense of civilization which has manyness. It accommodates many times. It accommodates many spaces. The Mahabharata makes us the kind of nation that we are, an epical nation. But if we choose to be a nation of a different kind, the effect will be not just on us, but the entire thing that we inherited will be destroyed. Bharat must become like Mahabharata. Mahabharata need not become like Bharat. Dhanyavad. Thank you. My prayer to Allah, Lord, Ishwar is, let every city in this subcontinent become like your city. Let Bangalore not become like the subcontinent. Let the subcontinent become like Bangalore. Dhanyavad.
Thank you for staying on for the full conversation. If you liked what you heard, please share it with family and friends. You can also leave us a review on iTunes or Apple Podcasts. The crew that makes these podcasts possible are Gaurav Krishna and Ishan Gupta on sound supervision and production, with support from S. Sarvanaraj and Raghavendra Tenkaila. Artwork and design is by Chandani Venkataraman of Crisscross Design Studios. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel on your favorite podcast platform. It can also be accessed on our website, bangaloreinternationalcenter.org. Do follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter to get regular updates on our programming. This is Lekha Naidu signing off on behalf of everyone at BIC.